I need you to understand something before this story begins. The human body is not designed to survive what Mara Calloway survived. Not medically, not physiologically, not by any reasonable calculation of what a 34-year-old woman, alone, injured, without supplies, without communication, without any of the tools that human beings have spent centuries developing specifically so that we do not have to rely on our bare bodies against the raw world, should have been able to endure. The doctors who examined her when she was finally airlifted out said this plainly, not in the dramatic language of a news conference, in the quiet, specific language of medical professionals who were looking at data and trying to reconcile what the data says with the person sitting in front of them. One of them, a wilderness medicine specialist named Dr. Angela Torres at the Fairbanks Regional Medical Center, said to a colleague privately after reviewing Mara's case, "The math doesn't work. She should not be here, and yet here she is." Here she is. On September 3, 2019, Mara Calloway left the trailhead at DenaliNationalPark's eastern backcountry on a solo hiking trip she had been planning for 2 years. She was experienced, she was prepared. She had her permits, her bear canister, her satellite communicator, her emergency supplies. She had done this before, not at this scale, not in this terrain, but she was not a novice. She was a woman who knew what she was doing and had planned carefully, and whose plan, on the 4th day, encountered something that no amount of planning can fully account for. The earth moved. A small landslide, triggered by heavy rain that had been falling for 36 hours and that had saturated the slope above the trail she was hiking, came down fast and without warning and took Mara Calloway's pack, her satellite communicator, her emergency kit, and 30 feet of trail with it. It also, in the process of taking these things, took her approximately 40 feet down a steep embankment and deposited her, alive but damaged, in a creek bed at the bottom. She lay there for a long time. When she was able to assess herself, the assessment was not good. A broken left wrist, 2 cracked ribs, a deep laceration on her right leg that would require attention she could not provide. No pack, no communicator.
No supplies beyond what she was wearing and what was in her jacket pockets. A small pocket knife, a lighter with perhaps a third of its fuel remaining, a single energy bar, and a folded piece of paper that was the topographic map of the section of the backcountry she was hiking. She was 4 days from the trailhead. She was injured. She was alone. The rain was still falling. She lay in the creek bed and looked at the sky, gray and low and indifferent, and she made a decision that she has described in the interviews she gave afterward with the matter-of-fact clarity of someone reporting a professional assessment rather than a life-altering crisis. I decided I was going to live. Not as an emotional statement, as a plan. Living was the plan. Everything else was details. 27 days later, she walked out of the wilderness. What she'd found on day 23, in the dense spruce forest on the south side of a ridge she had been working toward for a week, is the part of this story that nobody expected. The part that goes beyond survival. The part that will stay with you long after the details of how she ate and how she navigated and how she kept the wound in her leg from killing her have settled into the general category of extraordinary human endurance. Stay with me, because the survival itself is remarkable, but what she found and what it meant is the reason this story matters. Mara Calloway grew up in Bozeman, Montana, a town that has the specific character of places shaped by proximity to the wild, where the mountains are not a backdrop but a presence, where the outdoors is not a recreational category but simply the context in which life is lived. Her father, James Calloway, had been a wilderness guide for 20 years before bad knees retired him to teaching outdoor education at the local community college. Her mother, Susan, was a botanist whose work took her into the field regularly and who had brought Mara along on field research trips since Mara was old enough to walk without being carried. Mara had grown up understanding the outdoors not as something to be conquered or survived, but as something to be read, like a language, her father used to say, that rewards patience and punishes arrogance. She had learned to read weather patterns from the way clouds moved over peaks. She had learned to identify plants, which ones were edible, which ones were medicinal, which ones were neither and would hurt you if you tried. She had learned to navigate by topography, by sun position, by the behavior of water. She had learned, most fundamentally, that the wilderness did not care about you, and that this indifference was not hostility, but simply nature being what it was, and that the correct response to that indifference was not fear, but attention.
She had become a wilderness survival instructor herself by her late 20s, working for an outdoor education organization in Montana that ran courses for everyone from teenagers to corporate groups to military personnel. She had been in difficult situations before. She had never been in a situation like this. She was 34 years old on the morning she left the trailhead at Denali's eastern backcountry. She was fit and experienced and had done everything right in her preparation. She had told her sister Claire exactly where she was going and when she expected to be back. She had registered her route with the Park Service. She had a satellite communicator, the device that, had it not gone down the slope with everything else, would have had her airlifted out within hours of the landslide. She did not have it. She had a pocket knife, a lighter, an energy bar, and a topographic map. She had 2 cracked ribs and a broken wrist, and a leg that was going to be a serious problem if she did not address it quickly. She had the knowledge accumulated over 3 decades of being her parents' daughter and her own professional formation. And she had the decision she had made in the creek bed. Living was the plan. The first week was about 2 things, the leg and the direction. The laceration on her right was deep. She estimated approximately 4 inches long and deep enough to concern her significantly. She had nothing to close it with except what she could improvise, and improvisation in this context required the specific, uncomfortable knowledge of a survival instructor who has taught wound management many times, but who has never had to apply that knowledge to herself, alone, with a broken wrist that made everything twice as difficult. She used the creek. Not to clean the wound, the creek water was not clean, but to cool it, to reduce the initial bleeding, to buy herself time to think. She tore strips from the thermal underlayer she was wearing beneath her jacket.
Her jacket she was keeping intact because she would need it, and packed the wound and bound it as tightly as she could manage with one functional hand. It was not adequate. She knew it was not adequate. She also knew it was what she had. The ribs she could do nothing about, except breathe carefully and move carefully, and accept that every movement was going to hurt, and that this was the condition under which she was going to be living for the foreseeable future. The direction was the more critical decision. She was 4 days from the trailhead in one direction, the direction from which she had come. She was approximately 7 days from an alternative exit point she had noted on her topographic map, a ranger station on the western edge of the section she was hiking that was staffed seasonally. She did not know if it was still staffed. It was mid-September in Alaska. The seasonal window was closing. She chose the ranger station, not because it was closer, it was not, because moving forward felt in a way she could not entirely articulate and did not spend much time trying to articulate because she did not have time to spend on things that were not immediately useful, like the right direction. And because the ranger station, if it was staffed, if the seasonal window had not yet closed, represented the possibility of help rather than simply the possibility of returning to where she had started. She moved 4 miles on the first day after the landslide. This was, given her injuries, an extraordinary achievement. She knew it was extraordinary. She also knew it was not enough. She needed to cover more ground than her injuries were likely to permit. She found on the second day a walking stick, a piece of windfall spruce that was approximately the right height and reasonably straight. She spent 40 minutes shaping it with the pocket knife, working slowly because the broken wrist made everything slow. The stick changed everything. With the stick, she could move without putting full weight on the injured leg. With the stick, she could manage terrain that would have been impossible without it. She ate the energy bar on the second day. After that, she ate what the wilderness offered. This is where her botanical education, her mother's field research trips, the plant identification courses she had taught.
The specific knowledge accumulated over decades of being a person who paid attention became the difference between surviving and not. She knew what she was looking for, and she found it. High bush cranberries still clinging to their stems in the cold, fireweed seeds, spruce tips, bitter but caloric, a stand of what she identified as wild onions near a stream crossing. She ate carefully and methodically, never eating anything she was not absolutely certain of, because a mistake in plant identification in her current situation was not a mistake she could recover from. She built fires at night. The lighter was her most precious resource. She used it with the focused economy of someone who understands exactly what they have and exactly how long it needs to last. Small fires, carefully built, in sheltered spots that minimized exposure. She was not primarily building fires for warmth. Her jacket and the remaining layers of her clothing provided enough insulation for survival in the September temperatures, which were cold but not yet killing cold. She was building fires to stay sane, to have a center, to have something that was hers in a landscape that was indifferent to whether she existed. By the end of the first week, she had covered approximately 18 miles. She had 7 ribs that reminded her they were cracked every time she breathed too deeply. She had a leg wound that was showing signs that worried her. She had a broken wrist that had swollen to a size that made it look like something other than a wrist. She had approximately a third of the lighter's fuel remaining. She had seen no other human being. She was alive. The second week was harder than the first, not because the external conditions were significantly worse, though the weather deteriorated on the 9th day and did not improve until the 12th, but because the body, having managed the initial shock, began to present its accumulated bills. The leg was infected. She had known this was possible. She had been watching for the signs, the heat, the redness spreading beyond the wound margins, the particular quality of pain that is different from injury pain, and that her training had taught her to recognize as the body fighting something it was not winning against. By day 10, the signs were present. By day 11, she had a fever. A fever in this situation was not a minor problem.
A fever meant her body was redirecting resources toward fighting infection, resources she needed for movement, for thermoregulation, for the basic metabolic demands of keeping herself alive in a landscape where the daily caloric expenditure of survival significantly exceeded what she was taking in. She was already operating at a deficit. The fever made the deficit worse. She addressed it the only way she could. She found a stream and spent time in the cold water. Not pleasant, not safe to do too long, but effective at bringing the fever down enough to allow continued movement. She made a poultice for the wound from chewed plantain leaves, a technique she had taught in her survival courses, and had always presented to students with the caveat that it was a genuine last resort, a field improvisation with real limitations. She was at last resort. She applied it. She changed it when she could find more plantain. She kept moving. Not fast. The fever and the accumulated injury meant that the distances she covered in the second week were shorter than the first. But she kept moving, because stopping felt to her like a different kind of decision. She did not want to make that decision. Living was the plan. The plan required movement. On day 13, she found something that changed the practical calculus of her situation in a significant way. She found a fishing line. Not a complete setup, just the line, caught in a streamside bush, tangled, approximately 15 feet of monofilament that someone had lost or abandoned at some point. She spent an hour untangling it, working with one hand and her teeth, because an hour spent untangling fishing line was an hour that would produce food, and food was the thing she needed most. She fashioned a hook from a safety pin she found in the interior pocket of her jacket, a safety pin she had not remembered was there, and whose discovery felt, she has said, like a message from her past self to her present self, which was the closest thing to a spiritual experience she had during the 27 days. She rigged the line to the end of her walking stick. She found a pool in the stream where the water slowed and deepened. She sat for 2 hours with the improvised line in the water and caught 3 grayling. She ate 2 of them raw. She cooked the third over a small fire that she built with painful care, rationing the lighter's remaining fuel with the precision of someone who understands that each use is a subtraction from a finite total. The cooked fish was, she has said, the best thing she had ever eaten. This is not hyperbole. This is the specific, absolute truth of a person who has been running on wild berries and spruce tips for 10 days. The fishing line stayed with her for the rest of the 27 days. It did not solve the infection. It did not fix the wrist or the ribs or the fever that came and went. But it changed the nutritional picture enough to make a measurable difference in what she was able to do. Small things in extreme situations are not small things. While Mara was in the wilderness, her sister Claire Calloway was conducting her own campaign. Claire was 31 years old, lived in Anchorage, and was, by the accounts of everyone who knew her, the most organized person in any room she occupied at any given time. She had been the family manager since childhood, the one who remembered the appointments and the deadlines and the things that needed to be done before other things could happen. She was a project manager by profession and by temperament, and she had, on the 7th day after Mara's expected return date, the day after the National Park Service search and rescue operation was suspended due to deteriorating weather and expanding search area, and the operational reality that the search had not found any trace of Mara, and that continuing it at the same intensity was no longer justifiable, made a decision that her colleagues would later describe as characteristic.
She refused to accept the suspension. She did not become hysterical about this. She did not hold a press conference. She called everyone she could identify who might be useful: former colleagues of her father's who knew the terrain, wilderness survival experts, former search and rescue coordinators who were now in private practice. She created a spreadsheet. She organized volunteers. She hired, with the family's combined resources, a private search team with helicopter access and thermal imaging capability. She coordinated with the Park Service not as a grieving family member requesting updates, but as an operational partner sharing intelligence and adjusting search parameters.
She never stopped believing Mara was alive. She has been asked in multiple interviews how she maintained this belief through 27 days of no contact, no trace, no confirmation of anything. She says, "I know my sister. I know what she knows. I know what she can do. The math was hard, but it wasn't impossible. And I was not going to be the person who decided it was impossible before Mara decided it was impossible." She slept 4 hours a night. She ate when people put food in front of her. She called the search coordinator every morning at 7 a.m. with a prepared agenda for the day's search priorities. She was, by every account, the human equivalent of a search operation that refused to end. It was Claire's revised search grid, based on her analysis of the terrain Mara was most likely to have navigated, given her known decision-making patterns and her familiarity with the wilderness, that placed the helicopter in the right quadrant on day 27. The middle section of the 27 days was the hardest to describe and the hardest to survive, not because any single day was more catastrophic than the first week had been, but because the accumulation of difficulty had reached a level that began to produce effects she had not anticipated and had not fully prepared for. The psychological weight was the unexpected part. She had taught her students, that the primary challenges of extended wilderness survival were physical: food, water, shelter, warmth, that the mental component was manageable with the right training and the right framework. She was not wrong about this. She was also not entirely right. On day 17, she sat down on a rock in the middle of a stream crossing and did not get up for 2 hours. Not because she was too injured to get up, because she could not find in that moment the momentum to continue. The distance remaining felt in that moment like an abstraction, like a number without meaning. She knew intellectually that she was making progress. She knew intellectually that the ranger station existed and that she was getting closer to it. The intellectual knowledge was not in that moment sufficient. She has said, "I sat on that rock and I thought about Claire. I thought about what Claire was doing. I understood that whatever she was doing, she had not stopped. I knew Claire had not stopped, and I could not be the person who stopped while Claire had not stopped. So I got up." She got up. She crossed the stream. She kept moving. The fever came back on day 19 and stayed for 3 days. During those 3 days, she covered the least ground of the entire 27, approximately 4 miles over 72 hours, against terrain that on a good day would have taken 8 hours. She was operating at the edges of what her body could manage. She knew this. She managed it by not thinking about the total and only thinking about the next hour. She found a cache on day 21. Not a rescue cache, a backcountry food cache left by a previous party, a bear-resistant container secured to a tree near a stream crossing, one of the informal trail caches that hikers sometimes leave in remote backcountry areas for other hikers. It contained 4 protein bars, a small bag of mixed nuts, a tube of ibuprofen, and, almost impossibly, a small roll of medical tape. She sat with the cache and cried for the first time in 21 days. Not from relief, exactly. From the specific, overwhelming recognition that the universe, which had taken her pack and her communicator and given her cracked ribs and an infected leg, had also put a tube of ibuprofen and a roll of medical tape on a tree in the middle of the Alaskan backcountry, exactly where she needed them. She took the ibuprofen, she retaped the leg wound, she ate 1 protein bar and put the rest in her jacket pockets. She kept moving. Day 23 is the part of this story that Mara Calloway returns to most often in the interviews she has given. Not the rescue, not the medical assessment, not the reunion with Claire. Day 23. What she found on day 23. What it meant. She was in the dense spruce forest on the south side of the ridge she had been working toward for a week. The ranger station, according to her topographic map and her best calculations of her current position, was approximately 6 miles ahead. She had 4 protein bars and a handful of nuts and 3 matches and a lighter that she was fairly sure was completely out of fuel. She had not been able to test this because she was not willing to waste a use finding out. She was moving through the spruce forest when she heard it. Not an animal, not the wind, not the particular sounds that the forest makes in its own constant ambient conversation with itself that she had been listening to for 23 days and had learned to read like the language her father had always said it was. A sound that was human. She stopped. She stood completely still. She listened. Again, faint, directional, coming from her left, away from the ridge, into the thicker timber. A voice, or what sounded like a voice. She could not make out words. She was not sure for a moment that it was real. On day 23 of a solo survival situation, with a fever that had only recently broken and a caloric deficit that had been ongoing for weeks, the reliability of perception is not guaranteed. She knew this. She had taught this. She stood still and listened and waited for confirmation. It came. Not a voice this time. A sound that was unmistakably human. The sound of someone moving through brush. The specific rhythm of footsteps that no animal makes. She moved toward it. What she found, approximately 200 yards into the timber, sitting at the base of a large spruce tree with his back against the bark and his eyes closed, was a boy. He was approximately 10 or 11 years old. He was wearing a red jacket that was inadequate for the temperature. He had no pack, no supplies visible, no equipment of any kind. His face, when she reached him and he opened his eyes, was the face of someone who had been afraid for a very long time and had run out of the energy to continue being afraid and had arrived at the other side of fear, which is a kind of blankness that looks like calm but is not calm. He looked at her. She said, "Hey, I'm Mara. I'm going to help you." He said his name was Jonas. He was 11 years old. He had been separated from his family during a day hike 6 days earlier, when he had gone off trail to look at something and become disoriented in the dense timber, and had not been able to find his way back. He had been alone for 6 days. He had no food. He had a water bottle that he had refilled from streams. He had the red jacket and the clothes he was wearing, and a small flashlight with dying batteries. He had been sitting at the base of that spruce tree for approximately 18 hours. Mara Calloway, on day 23 of her own survival situation, injured, depleted, 6 miles from the nearest possible help, sat down next to Jonas and looked at him for a moment, and then made a calculation that took approximately 4 seconds, and that she has never second-guessed.
She said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get up and we're going to walk together, and we're going to get to a place where people can find us. Can you do that?" Jonas said, "I don't know." She said, "Yes, you can. I've been out here for 23 days and I can still do it. You've been out here for 6. You've got 17 days of energy left. Let's go." He almost smiled. He got up. What Mara Calloway did in the last 4 days of the 27 is something that the wilderness medicine specialists who reviewed her case have returned to repeatedly as an object of study, not because it was medically unusual, but because it was behaviorally extraordinary. She was, by any objective assessment, at or near the limit of what her body could sustain. The infection in her leg had not fully resolved. The wrist was a problem that was getting worse rather than better as the swelling progressed. The fever had broken, but the caloric deficit was real and accumulating, and its effects were visible in the way she moved and the way she processed information. She was not, in any clinical sense, in condition to take on the care of another person. She did it anyway. She split the remaining protein bars with Jonas, giving him more than half, because he was growing and depleted, and because the calculation of what a child needed versus what a depleted adult needed came out clearly in his favor. She slowed her pace to his pace, which was slower than hers. She navigated for both of them, explaining as she went, not because he needed the explanation, but because talking kept them both focused, and because the sound of a human voice in the forest was, she had found, its own form of sustenance. She taught him things. Over 4 days of walking together, she taught him how to identify trail markers, how to read water flow, how to build a small fire, how to assess terrain. Not because these things were urgently necessary, they were not at the level they had been for her, but because giving him knowledge felt, in a way she could not fully articulate, like the right response to finding him, like the thing her father would have done, like the thing her students needed.
Jonas was, she has said, remarkable. Not in a performed way, not the cheerful resilience of a child who has decided to be brave for an adult, in the quiet, specific way of a person who has been alone in the wilderness for 6 days at 11 years old and has discovered something about themselves in the process. He did not complain. He moved when she said move. He rested when she said rest. He watched the forest with the particular attention of someone who has learned, through necessity, that the forest contains information if you know how to receive it. On day 26, Jonas pointed to something. A surveyor's ribbon, faded orange, tied to a branch at approximately chest height. A marker, the kind left by Park Service personnel when marking routes or boundaries. Mara had walked past it. Jonas had seen it. She has said, "He saved me right back. I was so focused on the terrain ahead that I almost walked past the thing that told us we were close to a human trail. He saw it because he was 11, and he was looking at everything, because nobody had told him yet what was worth looking at and what wasn't." She tied one of Jonas's shoelaces to the ribbon, a bright piece of color, visible, a signal that someone had been here recently. And then she found the trail the ribbon was marking, and she followed it, and on the morning of day 27 she came out of the timber into a clearing and saw, approximately a quarter-mile ahead, the roof of the ranger station. She stopped walking. Jonas, beside her, stopped too. She looked at the roof for a moment. Then she looked at Jonas. She said, "There it is." He said, "Are we going to be okay?" She said, "Yeah, we're going to be okay." She meant it. For the first time in 27 days, she meant it without the qualification that living was the plan, but plans were uncertain things. She meant it as a fact, as something that had already been decided by the fact of the roof and the quarter-mile between them in it, and the specific, undeniable reality that they had both made it to this clearing and were both standing in it, and the rest was just walking. They walked.
The ranger station was staffed. Barely. It was mid-season closing, and the ranger on duty was Travis Webb, a 26-year-old seasonal Park Service employee who was in the process of doing final inventory before closing the station for winter. He heard them before he saw them. He came outside. He has described the moment he saw Mara and Jonas emerge from the tree line as the thing I think about when I think about why I do this job. He called it in immediately. The satellite radio in the station had full coverage. He had 2 people out of the wilderness, and an aircraft was on its way within 30 minutes. Claire Calloway was in the air on her private search team helicopter when the call came through. She has said that the voice on the radio, Travis Webb's voice, calm and specific, reporting 2 survivors, was a sound she was not prepared for, despite having spent 27 days preparing for it. She has said, "You prepare for the thing you want, and then it happens, and you are completely unprepared anyway. I don't know any other way to describe it." She was at the ranger station within the hour. Mara looked up. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Claire sat down next to her sister on the step and put her arm around her, and they stayed like that. 2 sisters, the one who had survived and the one who had refused to stop looking, until the helicopter arrived. Jonas Mercer's family had not stopped searching either. His parents, David and Kate Mercer, along with the Park Service search operation and a volunteer network that had grown to include over 200 people, had been looking for 6 days. Kate Mercer had not left the search coordination tent since day 2. Jonas was reunited with his parents at the Fairbanks Regional Medical Center, where he and Mara had both been airlifted for evaluation, on the afternoon of the 27th day. The reunion happened in a hospital corridor, which is not a setting designed for the magnitude of what it was asked to hold, but managed anyway. Kate Mercer dropped to her knees in the corridor and held her son for a very long time, while David stood behind them with his hands over his face, and the nurses at the station pretended to be very busy with things on their desks. Jonas, whose 11-year-old understanding of the situation was clear and specific and uncluttered by the adult need to process complexity, said to his mother within the first 5 minutes of the reunion, "Mom, the lady who found me had been out there for 23 days already, and she still helped me." Kate Mercer has said in the interview she gave about this, 6 months after it happened, "I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't know what to say to that. What do you say to your son when he tells you that a woman who had been alone in the wilderness for 23 days, injured, with nothing, chose to slow down and take care of him? I just told him, that's who the good people are. Remember her. Be like her." Jonas wrote Mara a letter 2 months after the rescue. He drew a picture on the envelope, a spruce forest with 2 small figures walking through it. Inside the letter he wrote, in the careful handwriting of an 11-year-old trying to say something important properly, "You said I had 17 days of energy left. I want you to know I used all of them, and I had some left over." Mara has the letter on the wall of her office. Dr. Angela Torres, the wilderness medicine specialist who oversaw Mara's medical evaluation and treatment at Fairbanks Regional, has presented the case at 2 national wilderness medicine conferences since. Not because it is unique in the history of survival cases. It is not technically, but because of what it illustrates about the margins of human endurance and the specific factors that appear to affect outcomes. The infection in Mara's leg required surgical debridement and a course of IV antibiotics. The wrist required a cast. The ribs required time.
The caloric deficit required careful, monitored nutritional rehabilitation. All of these things were within the expected range of treatment for what she had been through. What Dr. Torres has returned to in her conference presentations is the psychological component. The research on survival psychology, on what differentiates people who survive extended wilderness emergencies from those who do not, consistently identifies certain factors: a clear goal, the ability to manage attention, focusing on immediate tasks rather than the full scope of the problem, the maintenance of routine and structure in an unstructured environment, and, perhaps most consistently, connection, the presence of someone or something that the survivor is oriented toward. Mara had Claire. The knowledge that Claire was looking, even when she could not know for certain, even when the rational assessment was that the search had probably been suspended. She knew Claire well enough to know Claire had not stopped, gave her, she has said, a specific and tangible anchor, a direction to walk toward that was not just geographical. And on day 23, she found Jonas, and the psychology shifted. Dr. Torres has put it this way in her conference presentations: the research suggests that having someone to protect, someone to be responsible for, activates a different set of resources than having only yourself to protect. Mara was already a remarkable survivor, but finding Jonas appears to have unlocked something additional: a reserve, a motivation, a reason to push past the points where she might otherwise have stopped. He needed her, and needing to be needed in extreme survival situations may be one of the most powerful survival tools available. Mara has said, when this analysis was put to her, "He saved me." I want to be clear about that. He needed me, but he also saved me. Day 23, sitting on that rock, feeling like the distance was a number without meaning, that was before Jonas. After Jonas, the distance was the distance between him and home. That is a very different number. Mara Calloway returned to work as a wilderness survival instructor 8 months after the rescue. The first course she taught after her return was a 2-week advanced wilderness survival program for outdoor educators. On the first day of the course, she told her students 3 things that she had not been teaching before September 3, 2019. She told them, the fever will come, not might come, will. And when it does, the job is not to fight it dramatically. The job is to manage it methodically, 1 hour at a time, and keep moving. She told them, find your fishing line. Every situation contains something useful that is not obvious. The thing that is not obvious is usually the thing that changes the picture. Do not stop looking for it. And she told them, if you find someone who needs you, take them with you. Not in spite of the cost to yourself, because of it. Because the cost is also a resource. Because needing to be needed is one of the things that keeps a person walking when the distance has become a number without meaning. Then she taught the course. Jonas Mercer, now 12 years old, has reportedly decided he wants to be a wilderness guide when he grows up. He took a junior wilderness skills course the following summer. His instructor noted in the course evaluation that he had an unusual ability to notice things other students walked past, and a calm and focused response to difficulty that was well beyond his age. His mother Kate read this evaluation and sent a copy to Mara. Mara put it next to the letter on her office wall, next to the drawing of 2 small figures walking through a spruce forest. Claire Calloway has since co-founded, with Mara and with the support of the Mercer family, an organization called the Day 23 Project, named for the day Mara found Jonas and for the principle embedded in that day. The organization trains family members of missing persons in search coordination, giving the people who refuse to stop searching the tools and the knowledge to make that refusal effective. It runs family coordination seminars in Alaska, Montana, and Colorado. It has, in its first 2 years, contributed to the resolution of 3 separate wilderness missing persons cases. It is named for a day in September when a woman who had been alone in the wilderness for 23 days, injured and depleted and at the edges of what she could sustain, found a boy at the base of a spruce tree and made a decision in approximately 4 seconds that she has never second-guessed. The decision was, take him with you. The math, as Dr. Torres noted, did not work. She should not have been able to do it, and yet here they both are. Let us pause right here for just a moment.
Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends, and if you are new here, welcome home.
If this story is already finding you, if Mara is already sitting with you, if Jonas at the base of that spruce tree is already sitting with you, then you are exactly who this channel was built for. Hit subscribe right now, because tomorrow I am releasing another story just as powerful as this one, and you do not want to miss it. Every single day, new story, real stakes, real people, always worth your time. Drop your location in the comments below. Tell me where in the world you are watching from tonight. I read every single one. Now, back to the story. Back tomorrow. Back to day 23 and the boy in the red jacket, and what it means to find someone who needs you when you have nothing left. This story is about survival, but it is about something bigger than survival. It is about the decision made in a creek bed on a September afternoon. Living was the plan. Everything else was details. And what it takes to maintain that decision across 27 days of fever and infection and cold and hunger, and the specific psychological weight of a wilderness that does not care whether you exist. It is about Claire, who did not stop, who slept 4 hours a night and called the search coordinator every morning at 7 a.m. with a prepared agenda, and who never decided the math was impossible before Mara decided it was impossible. About the kind of love that expresses itself not through feeling, but through action, through spreadsheets and search grids, and the refusal to accept suspension. It is about Jonas, who had been alone for 6 days at 11 years old, and who had sat down at the base of a spruce tree and run out of energy to continue being afraid, and who got up anyway when a woman with a broken wrist and an infected leg and 23 days behind her said, "Let's go." About the specific, extraordinary resilience of a child who has discovered that they contain more than they knew. And it is about day 23, about the thing that Mara Calloway found in the spruce forest that had nothing to do with food or water or navigation or any of the practical tools of survival.
The thing that changed not just what she was surviving for, but how. About the way that needing to be needed is one of the most powerful resources available to a human being in an extreme situation, not in spite of its cost, but because of it. The math did not work. She did it anyway. That is the whole story. That is everything. When the distance becomes a number without meaning, find your Jonas. Take him with you. The cost is also the fuel. Keep walking. If this story found you tonight, if Mara found you, if Jonas in his red jacket found you, if Claire refusing to stop found you, then you already know why this channel exists. We tell stories about what human beings are capable of when the math does not work, and they do it anyway. About the survival that is not just physical, about the decisions made in creek beds and at the bases of spruce trees and in hospital corridors, about the people who refuse to stop and the people they find because they did not stop. If that matters to you, subscribe right now. New story every single day, each one told with the care this one was given. Like this video, for Mara, who made a decision in 4 seconds that she never second-guessed. For Jonas, who said, "I used all 17 days and had some left over." For Claire, who called the search coordinator every morning at 7 a.m. For Travis Webb, who came outside when he heard them. The algorithm responds to your like. Let it respond for them. Share this video with the person in your life who needs to hear that the cost is also the fuel, with the person who is at day 23 of something and cannot find the momentum, with anyone who needs to be reminded that finding someone who needs you when you have nothing left is not a burden. It is the thing that carries you the rest of the way. Comment below. Tell me which moment stopped you. Tell me about day 23. Tell me about Jonas pointing at the surveyor's ribbon that Mara had walked past. Tell me what the cost is also the fuel means to you.